Mandami seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, if the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies? One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a democratic socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won. In districts, Trump also won. All moderates.
Bill Maher is going full force against the Democratic Socialists, and he is not holding anything back. The outspoken TV host took aim at the movement, claiming they are steering the Democratic Party toward a far more radical direction and attempting to reshape the country in ways he sees as deeply concerning. His criticism was sharp, direct, and designed to spark debate across the political spectrum. Before we break it all down, make sure you subscribe and stay with us for the full story.
Democratic socialism is like a dating profile. Things look great until you meet up in the real world. For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're Democratic Socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Maher wasted no time and immediately turned his fire on Bernie Sanders, one of the most recognizable voices behind Democratic Socialism. Sanders has spent years promoting a single-payer healthcare model, framing it as the solution to America's struggling system. But Maher pointed to a real-world example that complicates that vision. Vermont, a heavily Democratic state where the idea was once seriously attempted, ended up abandoning the plan after it proved financially overwhelming and operationally unworkable. To Maher, that outcome wasn't just a policy failure in one state, it was a reality check. He argued that democratic socialism often sounds powerful in theory, built on promises of equality and universal access, but becomes far more difficult when it meets budget limits, logistics, and economic pressure. In his view, it's the kind of vision that earns applause in rallies and debates, yet struggles to survive when it has to function in the real world, and that disconnect, he suggests, reveals a much deeper weakness in the movement's core ideas.
This is against why people sometimes, I think, question some of what you're saying. This is a survey student loan forgiveness recipients. 73% of applicants say they are likely to spend their extra money on non-essential, including vacations, smartphone, drugs, and alcohol. They admitted that to the pollster.
Who is this pollster?
NBC News. 52% they are very likely to buy new clothing. 46% they would use the money for vacation and eat out at restaurants. This is why people have a thing about, I would never call it free money, like I said.
When Bernie Sanders is faced with tough, inconvenient facts, Maher says he often responds by questioning the source. While that isn't unusual in debate, Maher argues the sources still reflect a broader reality. Many Americans continue to favor capitalism over socialism. He believes voters are wary of large government-controlled systems because they value personal choice, incentives, and control over their income. Maher also suggests that when money is distributed without clear structure, it can lead to inefficiency and short-term thinking instead of real growth. In his view, this is where political ideals clash with human behavior, and why many people remain unconvinced by fully socialist-style policies despite the enthusiasm behind them.
I know the kids think that stuff that happened before their appearance on the planet didn't really happen, but it did. We've run this experiment many times, and the results are always obvious. Here's capitalist South Korea at night from space. Here's socialist North Korea. Yeah. In 1990, Venezuela was wealthier than Poland. But then Poland, finally free of Soviet-style economics, went all in on capitalism. And now their economy is as big as Japan. And people there have high wages, low inflation, cars, vacations, homes. Meanwhile, Venezuela traded capitalism for Hugo Chavez's socialism for the 21st century, which turned out to be like socialism in the last century or any century, a mess. It turned one of Latin America's richest countries into one of its poorest.
Maher shifts from critique to warning, arguing socialism isn't just theory, but something already tested in the real world with troubling results. He points to Venezuela, Cuba, and North Korea as examples where heavy state control has been linked to economic decline, shortages, and limited personal freedom. Venezuela's collapse, Cuba's ongoing struggles with shortages and weak growth, and North Korea's extreme isolation all serve, in his view, as cautionary cases. His point is simple. When socialist ideas move from theory into practice, the outcomes often fall far short of the promises, and that gap is something he believes Americans shouldn't ignore.
I don't think people realize we already have a lot of socialism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, veterans benefits, Pell Grants, COVID-era payments, farm subsidies, disability payments, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, corporate bailouts, and the jobs program that is building weapons the Pentagon doesn't even want. All that is socialism, much of it appropriate to soften the edges of capitalism. But the DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more.
Maher takes a more nuanced stance here, saying America is already a capitalist system with some social safety nets layered in to prevent people from falling through the cracks. But he warns that balance is key. In his view, moving too far toward full democratic socialism could weaken the incentives that drive innovation, productivity, and personal ambition. He argues that such a shift might also mean tighter government control over resources and fewer real choices in everyday life. Maher paints a cautionary picture of potential shortages and reduced availability of basic goods, even describing scenarios where people could end up waiting in long lines for essentials like bread or milk.
It's either defund the police or military in the streets, either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods.
Maher flatly rejects the push toward democratic socialism, arguing that what many voters actually want is much simpler. A system where hard work is rewarded and people feel secure keeping a fair share of what they earn. In his view, capitalism's appeal isn't just wealth creation, it's the incentive structure built around ownership, effort, and results. He frames it as a fairness issue, questioning why those who work harder, take risks, and build businesses should carry an ever-growing burden for everyone else. Maher warns that heavy reliance on redistribution can weaken motivation and create resentment among those who feel they are doing more of the work. In his blunt framing, he suggests that pooling everything into a large collective system without limits can reduce productivity and slow growth, turning what is intended as compassion into a system that risks stagnation and declining ambition.
Governor-elect Spanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal. You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in 2025. Yeah, no one wants to do that again.
Maher warns that Democrats could face political trouble in 2028 if they don't distance themselves from the more hardline Democratic Socialist wing. He argues voters are increasingly frustrated with policies they see as unrealistic or disconnected from daily life. In his view, elections are decided by the middle, and if the party is seen as too extreme, it risks losing broad support. Maher frames it as a perception issue, warning that tying the party to impractical policies could backfire at the ballot box.
This election is taking place when we have an administration in Washington which every day is moving us toward an authoritarian society.
This is America, New York City. Don't let them tell you any different. Don't let them tell you that we are the exception. We are the rule. And we set the bar for America. I'm talking to you, Donald Trump.
Let our words ring out so loud tonight that Andrew Cuomo can hear them in his $8,000 a month apartment. New York is not for sale.
Figures like Zohran Mamdani, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders are often viewed as leading voices in the Democratic Socialist movement, pushing policies that challenge the party's traditional direction. Mamdani in particular has gained attention in New York City by campaigning on bold progressive reforms and winning at the local level. Maher argues that this kind of success can encourage others in the party to adopt similar socialist-leaning strategies. But he warns that what works in a deeply progressive city like New York may not translate across the wider United States, where voters have very different priorities and expectations.
Now, Mamdani seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, if the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart. And we need to never use the word socialist or socialism ever again. Well, she was right, but they didn't listen. Typical, am I right, ladies?
Maher frames it as a tale of two political paths. Abigail Spanberger, campaigning in Virginia, took a more moderate approach by distancing herself from democratic socialism and warning about its risks, a strategy he says helped her appeal to centrists and independents. In contrast, Zohran Mamdani has found success in New York City by leaning into more progressive, socialist-leaning policies. Maher's point is that both strategies can win, but only within very different political environments. He suggests Spanberger's approach reflects a broader reality that what works in one region may not work nationally, and he agrees with the idea that pushing too far toward democratic socialism could alienate a large portion of American voters.
At least the party has a clear choice here, very clear. One wing is saying don't ever use the word socialist again, and one is saying,
I am a Democratic Socialist.
Clear, huh? So how do we decide who's right? Well, it turns out we don't really have to flip a coin. We have the evidence. In 2024, 13 Democrats won in districts Trump also won, all moderates. This isn't rocket science. All the left-leaning think tanks have done autopsies on 2024, and they all came up with the same message. Move to the center. Even the New York Times, which did so much to promote woke politics, now says the partisans are wrong. Moving to the center is the way to win.
Maher ultimately frames the debate as a clash between idealism and reality. He isn't just criticizing individual policies, but questioning the overall direction of the Democratic Party as it shifts toward more democratic socialist ideas championed by figures like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Zohran Mamdani. He argues that while these ideas may sound appealing in theory, they often struggle under real-world pressure, pointing to examples like Vermont's failed healthcare attempt and economic hardships in countries such as Venezuela and Cuba. At the same time, he contrasts this with more moderate approaches like Abigail Spanberger's, suggesting that American voters are far from unified. His conclusion is simple. If the party pushes too far too fast, it risks losing the broader electorate it needs to win, and ignoring that balance could come at a serious political cost. And that's the real debate happening right now, and it's far from over. This is Debate Storm. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments because your opinion is part of this conversation. Stay sharp, stay questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.